My suitcases were by the front door. 10 years. 10 years they lived in my house. 10 years on my money. And the night they won $50 million, my daughter-in-law looked at me and said, "We're fine now." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't remind her that the house was in my name. I just smiled and asked one simple question: "Did you check the name on the ticket?" Her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. And in that moment, I knew something she didn't. Before I tell you how that night ended, and trust me, it did not end the way she expected, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read them. And if you've ever been underestimated because you're quiet, stay with me, because this story isn't about luck, it's about preparation. My name is Dorothy Dottie Sinclair. I'm 68 years old, retired insurance risk analyst. Widowed 9 years, and I've spent my entire adult life calculating risk. Not gambling, not guessing, calculating. My late husband, Harold, used to joke that I could walk into a burning building and calmly estimate the structural loss before the firefighters arrived. But here's what no one tells you about being analytical. People mistake it for weakness, especially your own family. Adrian moved back into my house in 2015. He was 32 then, recently divorced. Career in transition? Credit card debt he didn't mention until 3 months later. Behind him came Vanessa, polished smile, designer handbag, Instagram following, perfect lighting even in bad weather. They said it would be temporary. Just until we stabilize, Mom. Stability, that word can hide a lot. The house is a 2-story colonial in Brookhaven, paid off in 2009, every brick accounted for, every improvement documented. When Harold passed, I didn't collapse. I reorganized, trusts updated, beneficiaries clarified, assets diversified, quietly, because discipline is invisible, and invisible things are often underestimated. At first, Adrian contributed what he could, which wasn't much. Vanessa launched her luxury lifestyle brand from my kitchen island, sponsored candles, discount codes. Morning routines filmed in my dining room, cropped carefully so viewers couldn't see the older crown molding or the slightly dated chandelier. Perception builds opportunity, she would say. What she meant was, appearances build leverage. Over time, contributions shrank, then disappeared, but expenses grew: private school for Miles, new SUV leased, kitchen remodel partially financed temporarily. I paid the property taxes, insurance, utilities. Groceries most months. I never announced it. I simply covered the shortfall. Because when you work in risk assessment, you don't panic at red flags, you document them. The lottery ticket was not spontaneous. That's important. Every year on Harold's birthday, I bought one ticket. Same numbers, our anniversary, Adrian's birth date. The day we paid off the house. It was ritual, not hope. Hope is emotional, ritual is disciplined. The night I bought that ticket, I signed it immediately. Full legal name, Dorothy Elaine Sinclair, in permanent ink. Because Harold taught me something in 1987 after a coworker lost a winning ticket in a dispute. Ownership, he said, isn't what you feel, it's what you can prove. I never forgot that. I took a photo of the ticket after signing it, and I emailed that photo to myself. Habit, documentation. Then I placed the ticket in the small ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter. Visible, accessible, not hidden, that part matters. The winning numbers were announced on a Tuesday night. I was upstairs reviewing a quarterly dividend statement when I heard Vanessa scream. Not fear, excitement. The kind of scream that vibrates through walls. Adrian shouted, footsteps, phones dialing. Miles ran down the hall yelling, "Mom." What happened? I walked down slowly. Vanessa was holding the ticket like it was a newborn child. "We won," she cried. 50 million. Adrian was pale, laughing and shaking at the same time. I looked at the television screen, numbers matched. All of them. Vanessa kissed Adrian, then she looked at me and something shifted. You see, until that moment I was necessary. My pension mattered, my paid-off home mattered, my financial cushioning mattered. But 50 million changes hierarchy in people's minds. Instantly, by dinner time, the energy in the house was different. Adrian started talking about real estate investments. Vanessa mentioned oceanfront property. She said casually, "We won't need to stay here anymore." Here, my house. Later that night I went upstairs. And when I came down again, my suitcases were by the door, not packed by me, by her. She'd folded my clothes neatly. Efficiency can be cruel when it's emotionless. "We've been thinking," Vanessa said. You deserve somewhere quieter, maybe a condo community. We'll cover it, of course, we're fine now. Fine now, as if I had been a temporary inconvenience. Adrian wouldn't meet my eyes. Miles stood halfway up the stairs, silent, watching. Children always watch. That's when I smiled, because I had been watching too, for 10 years. I see, I said calmly. Vanessa mistook calm for defeat. People often do, she continued. It's just time for us to build independently. Independently, in my foyer, under my chandelier with my name on the property deed. And then I asked it, softly. Did you check the name on the ticket? The room went quiet. Adrian blinked. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the paper. What do you mean? She asked. I held her gaze. Did you turn it over? 3 seconds. That's how long it took for uncertainty to enter the room. She flipped the ticket and saw it. Dorothy Elaine Sinclair. Signed, dated. Her smile didn't disappear, but it cracked. Just slightly. Adrian whispered, Mom, ownership is not emotional. It's documented. Vanessa recovered quickly. Well, she said, we're family. Family, interesting word when money appears. I didn't argue. I didn't reclaim my suitcases. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said we should probably clarify things with the lottery commissioner before anyone makes plans. And I picked up my phone, not to threaten, to schedule. Thomas Green doesn't appreciate chaos. He's methodical, procedure-driven. By the book, exactly the kind of man you want when signatures matter. As I dialed, I could feel the shift. For the first time in years, the power dynamic tilted, not because of the money, because of preparation. Vanessa looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at the ticket, Miles looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something rare, respect. The call connected. Lottery Commission, this is Thomas Green. Yes, I said evenly, my name is Dorothy Elaine Sinclair. I believe I hold the signed winning ticket for tonight's drawing. Silence on the other end. Then procedural questions, verification steps, appointment scheduling, all very calm, all very official. When I ended the call, Vanessa's voice was thinner. We were going to include you, of course. Of course, I nodded. I'm sure you were. But here's the thing about people who build their worth on optics. They never expect documentation. And as I carried my suitcases back upstairs, not out the door, but back upstairs, Vanessa stood frozen in the foyer, because something had changed. She thought 50 million made her independent. She didn't realize it made her exposed. And what she would discover the next morning would make that night look gentle. Because winning money is simple, claiming it is procedural, but dividing it, that's where character is revealed. And Vanessa had no idea what I had already structured long before that ticket was ever printed. But we'll get to that. For now, just remember this, quiet women are rarely powerless. They're usually prepared. The morning after the smile, the house was quieter than usual, not peaceful, strategic. Vanessa was already awake when I came downstairs, perfect hair, neutral tone blouse. Phone propped against a crystal vase recording a gratitude story for her followers. Big changes coming, she told the camera softly. When blessings arrive, you have to move boldly. She ended the recording the second she saw me. Adrian sat at the kitchen island staring at the lottery ticket like it might explode. Miles was eating cereal, watching everyone without speaking. Children sense tension the way animals sense storms. Good morning, I said. Vanessa gave me a tight smile. We need to discuss how we're going to handle this publicly. Publicly, not legally, not procedurally. Publicly, I poured my coffee. I already scheduled an appointment with the lottery commissioner, I said calmly. Thomas Green, 10 o'clock tomorrow. Adrian looked up. You already called? Yes. Vanessa's jaw tightened slightly. We could have handled that together. Of course, I said evenly. But the ticket is signed, that creates legal clarity. Procedure is important. Procedure doesn't flatter ego, it ignores it. By mid-morning, Vanessa was on 3 different calls. I overheard phrases: financial advisor onboarding, liquidity strategy, property acquisition timeline, none of it grounded in reality yet, because there was one problem. The money did not exist, not until verified, not until claimed, not until processed. Adrian followed me into the living room around noon. Mom, are you really going to claim it alone? There it was, not accusation, fear. I looked at him carefully. For 10 years, I said softly, I've quietly covered your shortfalls, mortgage assistance, taxes, insurance, private school deposits. Do you remember any of that? He swallowed. Yes, I never demanded repayment. I never threatened to sell the house. I never put conditions on support. He nodded. So tell me, Adrian, why did my suitcases end up by the door before the ticket was even verified? He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Vanessa had acted quickly, but he had allowed it. Silence is participation. And that's a lesson many women learn too late. That afternoon, Vanessa posted a photo, all three of them smiling in the kitchen. Caption: New beginnings when hard work meets destiny. Hard work, interesting choice of words. The comments started flooding in. Didn't your mother-in-law live there? Hope you're taking care of her. Vanessa deleted those within minutes. Optics must remain clean. But what she didn't understand was that documentation doesn't disappear the way comments do. At 8:15 p.m., Adrian knocked on my bedroom door. Vanessa wants to come to the appointment tomorrow. She's welcome, I replied. Anyone can attend. He hesitated. She thinks you're overcomplicating this. I smiled faintly. When someone has built their identity around appearances, paperwork feels like an insult. He didn't argue, because deep down, Adrian knew. For years, Vanessa had resented living in my home. Resented the quiet reminder that her lifestyle rested on a foundation she did not build. $50 million didn't change her insecurity, it amplified it. The next morning, we drove separately. That was Vanessa's choice. Symbolism matters to her. She arrived in the leased SUV. I arrived in my 10-year-old sedan. Margaret Ellis met me at the entrance. 73 years old, sharp eyes, navy suit, zero tolerance for emotional theatrics. I'd called her the night before. She didn't sound surprised. Dottie, she'd said calmly, bring every document you have, and don't react emotionally no matter what they do. Margaret doesn't believe in reactions. She believes in leverage. Thomas Green greeted us in a neutral conference room. No excitement, no congratulations, just protocol. Mrs. Sinclair, he said, may I see the ticket? I handed it over. He turned it over immediately, not the front. The back, he read my signature, nodded once. Dorothy Elaine Sinclair, matching identification required. I placed my driver's license on the table. Margaret slid forward a notarized affidavit verifying my signature. Vanessa shifted in her chair. Adrian stared at the table. Procedure is cold, but cold protects truth. Thomas examined the timestamp, serial number, and claim documentation. Mrs. Sinclair, he said, as the sole signatory on the ticket, you are the legal claimant. No co-claimants are listed. The word sole hung in the air. Vanessa leaned forward. We're family, she said. Surely there's a joint declaration option? Thomas looked at her evenly. Only the signatory can authorize distribution. Distribution, not entitlement. Margaret's pen tapped lightly against her legal pad. She didn't look at Vanessa. She didn't need to. On the drive home, the silence in the SUV was thick. Vanessa spoke first. So what's the plan? The plan, interesting. For now, I said, there is no plan. The funds will be processed in 6 to 8 weeks. After taxes. Vanessa's head snapped toward me. After taxes? Yes. She hadn't calculated that part. Optics rarely include deductions. Adrian finally asked, Mom, are we included? I didn't answer immediately, because sometimes the pause teaches more than the response. I've always taken care of you, I said softly, but inclusion is not automatic. It's intentional. Miles from the back seat spoke quietly. Grandma, yes, sweetheart. Are we still a family? That question pierced deeper than any financial one. I turned slightly in my seat. Family isn't decided by money, Miles, it's decided by behavior. Vanessa went silent. Adrian's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel, and in that moment something shifted again. Because for the first time, the conversation wasn't about wealth. It was about accountability. That evening, Vanessa didn't post. No filtered photos, no captions about destiny, just silence. But silence when someone is image-driven is loud. Margaret called me at 9:30 p.m. They'll apply pressure soon, she said. Guilt, emotional leverage, possibly public narrative control. I expected that. Good, then let's accelerate before they do. Accelerate what? I asked. Your existing structures. She paused deliberately. You didn't think I forgot about the trust you updated 3 years ago, did you? Vanessa believed the ticket changed everything. She didn't realize it activated something that had already been built. And when she discovers what that structure says, her reaction will not be subtle. But that conversation, that happens next. And trust me, it's not the money that shocks her. It's the conditions attached to it. Because when a quiet woman plans, she doesn't just plan for gain, she plans for exposure. Vanessa didn't speak to me the entire evening after the lottery commission meeting. Not directly, instead she spoke around me, loud phone calls, exaggerated sighs, strategic kitchen cabinet slams. Adrian retreated into his office pretending to review investment opportunities, but I could hear the anxiety in his pacing. Money that hasn't arrived yet is the most dangerous kind. It makes people act as if reality has already shifted. At 7:40 p.m., Margaret Ellis arrived. Vanessa wasn't expecting that. Margaret does not announce herself twice. She rang the bell once. I opened the door, navy suit. Leather briefcase, calm eyes. Vanessa appeared in the hallway, posture straight, expression curated. "Oh," she said lightly. "We're having company." Margaret looked at her once, politely. "Not company, counsel." The word hung in the foyer. Adrian stepped forward. "Mom, is this necessary?" "Yes," I said softly. "It is." We gathered in the dining room, my dining room, under the chandelier Vanessa once said was aesthetic but dated. Margaret placed 3 folders on the table. One in front of me, one in front of Adrian, one she kept. Vanessa noticed she didn't receive one. That detail unsettled her. "Mrs. Sinclair retained me 3 years ago to update her estate structure," Margaret began calmly. Vanessa blinked. "Estate structure?" Adrian looked confused. "Mom," I folded my hands. "After your father passed, I restructured everything." Margaret opened the folder in front of Adrian. "The Sinclair Family Stability Trust was created in 2022. Vanessa's eyes sharpened. "Trust?" Margaret nodded. "Irrevocable, asset-protected, multi-tier distribution conditions." Silence. Adrian flipped through pages slowly. I watched realization move across his face. "Mom, this includes the house?" "Yes," I replied. "The house was transferred into the trust 3 years ago." Vanessa straightened. "That's not possible." "Adrian's name was," Margaret corrected gently. "A temporary survivorship provision. It was dissolved during restructuring. The property is wholly controlled by the trust. Dorothy Sinclair is trustee. Not beneficiary?" Vanessa's mouth parted slightly. "For 10 years she resented living under my roof. She never realized she wasn't living under me, she was living under a structure. Structures don't argue, they enforce." Adrian swallowed. "What does that mean exactly?" Margaret continued, voice steady. "It means the lottery winnings, once deposited, will be directed into the existing trust structure. Not personal accounts." Vanessa leaned forward sharply. "That's absurd, it's her ticket, she can just transfer funds." Margaret smiled faintly. "Yes, she can, but she won't." Vanessa looked at me. Why, there it was, not anger, confusion. Because she assumed the ticket was leverage. She didn't consider it might be reinforcement. "Because sudden wealth destabilizes families," I said quietly, "and instability destroys what it touches." Vanessa's composure slipped for the first time. "So what are you saying? That we don't get anything?" Margaret slid a single page across the table. Distribution conditions. Tier 1, Educational Trust for Miles, fully funded. Tier 2, Conditional Housing Grant for Adrian, debt-free property under behavioral clauses. Tier 3, Structured Disbursement contingent on financial transparency and marital stability review. Vanessa read the third line twice. "Marital stability review?" Margaret's tone did not change. "Any spouse of a direct beneficiary must undergo financial disclosure and liability assessment before accessing trust-controlled funds." Vanessa's breathing shifted. "You're auditing me?" "Yes," Margaret said simply. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Adrian looked pale. "Mom, you did all this without telling us?" "Risk assessment isn't announced," I replied. "It's prepared." Vanessa stood abruptly. "This is control, this is manipulation." Margaret closed her folder. "No, Mrs. Sinclair, this is protection." Vanessa laughed, brittle. "Protection from what?" I met her eyes. "From exactly what happened the night my suitcases were by the door." That landed. Adrian stared at the table. Miles, who had been quietly sitting on the stairs listening, children always listen, stepped into view. "Dad," he said softly. "Are we in trouble?" Adrian looked like something inside him cracked. "No, buddy." But he didn't sound certain. Margaret stood. Mrs. Sinclair, once the lottery funds are processed by Thomas Green's office, will execute transfer into the trust immediately. Until then, I recommend minimal public activity. Vanessa stiffened. Public activity? Margaret glanced at her phone on the counter. Your Instagram posts imply direct ownership. Vanessa's face flushed. It's branding. It's discoverable evidence, Margaret replied calmly. That word hit harder than anything else that evening. Evidence. Vanessa's shoulders lowered slightly, not defeated, calculating. I've worked in insurance long enough to recognize when someone shifts from confrontation to strategy. She wasn't done. She was adjusting. Margaret gathered her files. Dorothy, call me the moment Thomas Green confirms transfer timeline. Of course. She left without drama. The door closed softly. Silence settled again. Adrian spoke first. Mom, you don't trust us. I looked at him carefully. Trust isn't declared, it's demonstrated. Vanessa crossed her arms. You think I'm some kind of gold digger? I didn't answer immediately, because sometimes silence forces self-examination better than accusation. I think, I said finally, that you equate money with worth. And that's dangerous. Her jaw tightened. And you equate control with safety. That almost made me smile. No, I said gently. I equate structure with survival. Miles walked over and stood beside me. He slipped his hand into mine. Quiet, steady, that simple gesture said more than any legal document. Adrian watched it happen, and I saw something change in him, not greed, not resentment. Realization. For 10 years he relied on me quietly. Now he was seeing what quiet truly meant. Vanessa picked up her phone. Fine, she said, we'll cooperate. But her voice lacked conviction, because cooperation implies surrender of control. And Vanessa has never surrendered anything easily. As they went upstairs, I remained at the dining table. I looked at the trust documents again. 3 years ago, when I created it, I didn't know there would be a lottery win. I only knew one truth: women who build quietly must protect loudly on paper. The lottery ticket wasn't the surprise, the structure was. And Vanessa still hasn't realized the most important clause hidden inside that trust. The one that activates if a beneficiary attempts coercion or displacement of the trustee. If that clause triggers, access freezes entirely. And after the suitcase incident, I've begun wondering whether it already has. But I haven't told them that yet, and when they find out what that clause requires, it won't be a quiet conversation. Vanessa lasted exactly 48 hours before she tried to regain control. It started subtly. A phone call taken loudly in the kitchen about family financial misalignment. Then a meeting with a wealth strategist who pulled into my driveway in a silver Porsche as if optics alone could unlock access to money that did not yet exist. I watched from the window without comment. I learned long ago that people reveal their true intentions when they believe momentum is on their side. By the third day, the tone shifted. Adrian approached me after dinner, hands in his pockets the way he used to stand when he'd broken something as a teenager. Mom, Vanessa thinks it would be cleaner if the ticket were reassigned before payout. Just for efficiency, I almost admired the word choice. Reassignment requires my signature, I replied evenly, and my consent. He hesitated. She thinks it would calm investors. What investors? I asked softly. He had no answer because there were none, only assumptions built on money that had not cleared. That evening I noticed something else. My file drawer in the study had been opened, not rummaged, just opened, papers slightly shifted. Vanessa doesn't do messy searches, she does strategic ones. She was looking for leverage. What she didn't know was that the most important documents were no longer in the house. Margaret had anticipated this years ago. Originals were secured in a safe deposit box. Copies were encrypted digitally. I said nothing. Instead, I called Margaret Ellis. She listened without interruption. Expected, she said. Pressure escalation. Has she requested document access formally? Not yet. Good, the coercion clause triggers only if there is documented attempt to override trustee authority. I looked out the window at Vanessa laughing on the patio while filming a gratitude update. Margaret, I asked quietly, what qualifies as coercion? There was a pause. Attempted displacement, financial intimidation, or forced relocation of the trustee. Forced relocation. The suitcases, my mind stilled. Document everything, Margaret added. The next morning, the escalation arrived. Vanessa entered the kitchen holding a printed document. "We need to streamline this," she said, placing it on the table in front of me. It was a drafted authorization form. "Just temporary financial oversight," she explained. "So we can coordinate liquidity planning?" "You're asking me to relinquish trustee discretion," I said calmly. "It's just paperwork," she replied lightly. I didn't touch the pen she set beside it. "No," her smile faltered slightly. "Dottie, with all due respect, you're almost 70. Managing $50 million is complex." There it was, age as leverage. "That's why I hired professionals," I answered. Adrian stepped in. "Mom, nobody's trying to push you out." I held his gaze. My suitcases were by the door before the numbers were verified. Silence fell heavy. Vanessa's composure cracked just a fraction. "We were preparing for change," she said sharply. "Preparation without conversation is displacement," I replied. She picked up the document, jaw tight. "You're making this adversarial." "No," I said gently. "I'm making it structured." That afternoon, I received a call from Thomas Green. "Mrs. Sinclair, the claim has been validated. Disbursement processing begins next week. Funds will transfer to the designated account on file." "Thank you," I said. "And Mr. Green, please note, no amendments to claim authorization are permitted without my in-person signature." "Already documented," he replied. Detail-oriented men are a gift in volatile situations. By evening, Vanessa's patience evaporated. I found her in the hallway outside my bedroom. "You can't just freeze us out," she said, voice low but intense. "Adrian deserves access." "Adrian has access," I replied. "Conditional, structured, and protected." "Protected from what?" "From instability," I said. "From impulsive optics. From reputational collapse if debt surfaces publicly." Her eyes flashed. She hadn't told Adrian the full extent of her credit exposure. That much was clear. She stepped closer. "If you don't cooperate, this house is going to become uncomfortable." The words were soft but unmistakable. I felt something inside me go very still, not fear, confirmation. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For clarifying." She looked confused. "Clarifying what?" "Intent." I closed my bedroom door calmly, then I picked up the phone. Margaret answered on the second ring. "It's activated," I said. She didn't ask how I knew. "I'll prepare the enforcement notice." The coercion clause in the Sinclair Family Stability Trust was precise. If any beneficiary or affiliated spouse attempts to displace, intimidate, or override the trustee, distribution is automatically suspended pending review. Temporary housing stipends replace asset access, direct liquidity halts. It was designed for scenarios I hoped would never occur. Yet here we were. The next morning, Margaret arrived again. No drama, just paperwork. She requested Adrian and Vanessa join us at the dining table. Adrian looked tired. Vanessa looked defensive. Margaret placed a single document in the center. "Due to documented coercive behavior toward the trustee," she began evenly, "Tier 2 and Tier 3 distributions are hereby suspended pending compliance review." Adrian blinked. "Suspended?" Vanessa went pale. "On what grounds?" Margaret slid forward printed timestamps. "Notes, my written record, the relocation attempt, the authorization pressure, the hallway statement." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "This is retaliation." "No," Margaret corrected. "It is enforcement." Adrian looked at me stunned. "Mom, you froze access?" I met his eyes calmly. "You froze trust when you allowed displacement to happen." The room was silent except for Miles shifting in the doorway. He'd been listening again. He always listens. "Does that mean we're poor again?" he asked quietly. That question cut deeper than any legal clause. I stood and walked over to him. "No, sweetheart. It means we're learning." Behind me, Vanessa's composure fractured. "This is insane. We won $50 million. Margaret's voice stayed level. "Correction, Dorothy Sinclair won $50 million. Structured assets require structured behavior." Vanessa looked at Adrian. "Say something." He didn't. Because for the first time, he was seeing the architecture beneath the generosity he'd relied on for years. Margaret gathered her files. "Compliance review will reassess in 90 days. She paused, assuming behavioral alignment. She left quietly. The front door closed, and something shifted permanently inside this house. Vanessa stormed upstairs. Adrian remained seated. "Mom," he said slowly, "you planned for this." "I planned for instability," I corrected. He rubbed his face. I never realized how much you protected us from. That's the point of protection, I said softly. It's invisible. That night, the house was silent again, but not strategic this time. Reflective. I stood in the kitchen alone and looked at the refrigerator. For a brief second, I saw again the image of my suitcases near the door. Preparation without conversation. Displacement without consent. She thought that moment would make me small. Instead, it activated a clause she never saw coming, and the money hasn't even arrived yet. When it does, the real restructuring begins. The transfer cleared on a Tuesday at 9:12 a.m. I know the exact time because Thomas Green sent a confirmation email with the subject line, Funds Released VERIFIED Claimant. DOROTHYELAINESINCLAIR. $50 million does not feel like fireworks when it lands. It feels like silence. Numbers on a screen, structured digits in a trust-controlled account. No balloons, no confetti, just liquidity. I was sitting at the breakfast table when the notification came through. Vanessa was upstairs filming a reset routine. Adrian was already at work trying to repair a sales pipeline he had neglected during lottery euphoria. Miles was at school. I opened the message. The funds had been wired directly into the Sinclair Family Stability Trust holding account, exactly as Margaret structured it years ago. No joint access, no secondary signature authority. Clean, enforceable, real. I took a slow sip of coffee and closed the laptop. Downstairs, Vanessa's heels clicked on hardwood. She entered the kitchen mid-sentence, speaking into her phone. Yes, liquidity event confirmed. We're finalizing allocation this week. She froze when she saw my expression. Is it done? She asked, ending the call abruptly. Yes, I said calmly, it's done. Her eyes widened, searching my face for excitement, weakness, generosity, anything impulsive. So when do we start moving assets? She asked. We don't, I replied, the words settled heavily. Excuse me, we don't move assets, we manage structure. She stared at me as if I'd spoken another language. Adrian arrived home early that afternoon. That alone told me he knew the wire had cleared. He walked straight into the study. Mom, he said quietly, it's real? Yes. He sat down slowly. That changes everything? I looked at him carefully. It doesn't change character. That's the truth women learn when money enters the room. It doesn't create new personalities, it reveals existing ones. At 3:40 p.m., Margaret Ellis arrived with 2 additional advisors, a fiduciary accountant and a compliance auditor. Vanessa wasn't prepared for that. She expected celebration. Instead, she got oversight. We gathered in the dining room again. Margaret placed a ledger on the table. Phase 1 allocation, she said evenly. Debt transparency review. Vanessa stiffened. What debt? Margaret turned one page and slid a printed report across the table. Vanessa's color drained. You ran a credit audit? She asked sharply. Trust clause requires full disclosure before beneficiary access, Margaret replied. Adrian looked at the numbers. 89,000, he whispered. Vanessa's jaw tightened. That's personal. Not when you requested structured asset access, Margaret said calmly. The room was heavy. Adrian looked at Vanessa like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. You told me it was under control. She didn't answer. Because it wasn't, Margaret continued. Phase 2 allocation, educational trust for Miles fully funded today. She turned toward me. 5 million placed in tiered growth account. Miles' future secured. No conditions tied to ego, just performance milestones and age thresholds. Vanessa blinked. 5 million, she repeated. Yes, I said softly. He won't need to chase optics. Adrian exhaled slowly. And us? He asked carefully. Margaret folded her hands. Tier 2 housing grant remains suspended until behavioral compliance review concludes. Vanessa stood abruptly. This is punishment. No, I replied. This is protection. Protection from me, she snapped. From instability, I said again, her voice rose. You're humiliating us. Publicly, I asked, or privately, that landed. Vanessa's entire identity operates on public validation. Private correction feels like an attack. Margaret remained unmoved. Mrs. Sinclair, access can resume once financial transparency is complete and marital stability assessment is concluded. Adrian rubbed his temples. What does that mean exactly? It means, Margaret said calmly, we determine whether sudden wealth will strengthen or fracture this household. Silence. Miles entered quietly from the hallway. He'd come home early for a half day. He stood there listening. "Grandma," he asked softly. "Yes. Is money supposed to make people happier?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Money makes people louder," I said gently. "It doesn't make them wiser." Vanessa left the room without another word. The front door closed harder than necessary. Adrian remained seated. "Mom," he said quietly, "I let things get out of control." I didn't rush to comfort him. "You allowed silence when action was required," I said. "That's different." He nodded, because he knew it was true. Margaret closed her folder. "Dorothy, next step is asset rebalancing. Philanthropic structure, personal liquidity, contingency reserve." "Proceed," I said, "because this isn't about revenge, it's about direction." That evening, Vanessa posted nothing. No photos, no captions, no filtered joy. Silence from her now meant recalculation. Later that night, she knocked on my bedroom door, not aggressively, carefully. "Can we talk?" she asked. I opened the door but did not invite her in fully. Boundaries are subtle but visible. "You plan for me," she said quietly. "I plan for risk," I corrected. "And you assess me as risk?" "You assessed yourself," I said softly. She looked tired, not angry, just exposed. "If I fix it," she said slowly, "if I clean up the debt, if I cooperate, does the suspension lift?" I studied her carefully. For the first time, the question wasn't about optics. It was about stability. "Yes," I said. "Structure rewards alignment." She nodded once. "I didn't think you'd actually freeze it." "That's the difference between image and infrastructure," I replied. After she left, I stood by the window and looked at the quiet street. $50 million had entered this house. But instead of chaos, there was order. Instead of ego, there was enforcement. And for the first time since the suitcase incident, I felt something settle inside me, not triumph, not revenge. Authority, because wealth without structure destroys families, but structure without apology protects them. And the real test hasn't happened yet, because in 2 weeks, Margaret will conduct the marital stability review. And that review will force truths into the open that money can't soften. When that happens, someone will have to decide whether they value optics more than integrity. And not everyone will like what they discover. The marital stability review was scheduled for Thursday at 10 o'clock a.m. Margaret insisted it be held in my dining room, not a neutral office. "Power dynamics matter," she said. "Location reminds people what's at stake." Vanessa dressed like she was attending a board meeting, cream blazer, structured posture, no jewelry except her wedding ring, which she adjusted 3 times before sitting down. Adrian looked exhausted. He hadn't slept well in weeks. Sudden wealth exposes cracks that were always there. It doesn't create them. Margaret arrived precisely on time, followed by the fiduciary auditor and a family systems consultant she'd retained quietly. Vanessa's eyes narrowed at that. "A consultant?" she asked. "Yes," Margaret replied calmly. "We assess behavior, not just numbers." I sat at the head of the table, not because I needed to assert authority, but because it was my house. My structure, Margaret opened the session. "This review determines whether Tier 2 housing allocation and Tier 3 discretionary distributions resume." Vanessa folded her hands tightly. "We understand." "Good," Margaret said. "Then we begin with transparency?" The auditor presented a summary of Vanessa's outstanding liabilities: credit cards restructured, payday loans negotiated, 2 accounts still in delinquency. Vanessa tried to maintain composure. "I've initiated repayment plans," she said carefully. "Documentation?" Margaret asked. Vanessa slid forward printed confirmations. Margaret scanned them. "Acceptable progress," she said evenly. Adrian exhaled slightly. Then the consultant spoke. "Financial risk often masks emotional instability. Let's discuss the suitcase incident." The air shifted instantly. Vanessa's shoulders stiffened. Adrian looked at the table. "That was emotional," Vanessa said quickly. "We thought independence was healthier." "Independence," I repeated softly, without conversation. The consultant looked at Adrian. "Did you agree with placing your mother's belongings by the door before legal verification?" Long pause. "No," he admitted quietly. "Why didn't you intervene?" Another pause. "I didn't want conflict." There it was, the truth that costs more than money: avoidance. Margaret made a small note. Vanessa's voice sharpened slightly. "We weren't trying to displace her permanently." Intent doesn't override impact, Margaret replied calmly. Silence settled. Then the consultant turned to Vanessa. Do you believe wealth determines worth? Vanessa hesitated. That question landed deeper than she expected. I believe stability matters, she answered, and visibility creates opportunity. Visibility for whom? The consultant asked. Vanessa didn't answer immediately. Because visibility has always been her currency, and suddenly the room wasn't impressed by it. I watched her carefully. For the first time since the lottery win, she wasn't performing. She was thinking. Miles entered quietly from the hallway. He'd been instructed to stay upstairs, but children always listen. Can I say something? He asked softly. Margaret nodded. Briefly. He looked at his parents, then at me. When Grandma's bags were by the door, I thought she did something wrong. The room went very still. I was scared, he continued. Because if she could get pushed out, anyone could. Vanessa's face changed, not defensive, not angry. Just struck. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. That's the moment the review truly began, not with paperwork, with consequence. Margaret folded her hands. Behavioral impact on minor dependent is noted. Vanessa looked at Miles and then at me. I didn't think about that, she said quietly, and for once it didn't sound like an excuse. It sounded like realization. The consultant asked one final question. If access to trust distributions required demonstrated partnership with Dorothy rather than competition, would you accept that condition? Vanessa hesitated. Pride wrestled with practicality. Finally, she said, yes. Adrian looked surprised. You would, she nodded slowly. I can't build a future fighting structure, I have to align with it. That was the first strategically honest thing she'd said in weeks. Margaret closed her folder. Preliminary compliance achieved. Tier 2 housing allocation will be conditionally reinstated under monitored oversight. Adrian's shoulders dropped in relief. Vanessa's breath steadied. Tier 3 discretionary distribution, Margaret continued, remains restricted pending 6-month behavioral consistency review. Vanessa didn't argue. That told me more than any apology could. The meeting ended quietly. No shouting, no drama, just recalibration. After everyone left, Adrian stayed behind. Mom, he said softly, I didn't realize how much silence costs. I looked at him gently. Silence protects comfort. It rarely protects people. He nodded slowly. I'm trying. I know, I said. Later that evening, Vanessa came into the kitchen while I was making tea. No camera, no phone. I built my identity around looking successful, she said quietly. Living in your house made me feel small. I didn't interrupt. When the ticket won, I thought it finally made me equal. She paused. I didn't realize I was trying to compete with someone who wasn't competing. I stirred my tea slowly. Wealth isn't a competition, I said gently. It's responsibility. She nodded once, not defeated, just adjusting. Upstairs, I could hear Miles laughing with Adrian. That sound mattered more than any distribution tier. Because the real inheritance isn't money, it's stability. And stability is built through structure, not ego. The review passed, but conditionally. The trust remains watchful. And so do I, because wealth tests alignment over time, not in one meeting. And the true measure of change isn't what someone says under review. It's what they do when no one is watching. And that test. It starts tomorrow. Consistency is harder than confrontation. Anyone can behave properly under review. The real test begins when oversight fades into the background. The week after the marital stability review, the house felt different. Not lighter, more aware. Adrian began coming home earlier, not to discuss investments, but to sit at the dinner table. That alone told me something shifted. Vanessa reduced her posting schedule, not dramatically, strategically. Instead of luxury teasers and ambiguous big moves coming captions, she pivoted toward intentional living and family reset. I watched quietly, not because I distrust change, but because I measure it over time. The Tier 2 housing allocation had been conditionally reinstated. That meant Adrian and Vanessa could secure a home, debt-free, but not sell, leverage, or refinance it without trust approval. Structure removes impulsivity. That condition bothered Vanessa more than she admitted. One evening, she approached me with printed listings. We found something modest, she said carefully. The word modest coming from her carried weight. I reviewed the property summary. Sensible square footage, stable neighborhood, good school district, no spectacle. This is appropriate, I said. She looked relieved. You approve? The trust approves, I corrected gently. That distinction matters. Adrian exhaled slowly. I could see pride and discomfort wrestling inside him. For years, he tied his identity to upward perception. Now he was learning that security isn't about appearing elevated, it's about being grounded. A few days later, Margaret called. Dorothy, there's an external inquiry. My voice stayed calm. From whom? A private investment group contacted Thomas Green's office asking whether early claim proceeds were being leveraged into speculative ventures. I didn't need clarification. Vanessa, Thomas declined to release information, Margaret continued, but someone is exploring outside liquidity. That's how instability returns. Quietly, I waited until dinner to address it. Vanessa, I said evenly, did you contact outside investors regarding projected funds? She froze mid-bite. Adrian looked confused. Investors? I was just exploring partnerships, she replied quickly. It's branding alignment. Branding is not leverage, I said softly, and projected funds are not collateral. Her jaw tightened. You don't trust me, I met her gaze. Trust requires predictability. Silence fell over the table. Miles looked between us carefully. Adrian spoke next. Vanessa, we agreed no outside commitments without structure. She looked at him sharply. I'm trying to build something. Build with foundation, I said gently, not anticipation. That night I noticed something else. Vanessa deleted 3 recent posts hinting at upcoming private equity collaborations. That wasn't ego retreating. That was correction. Margaret later confirmed Thomas Green documented the inquiry but took no action. Procedure had protected us again. The following week, the housing purchase closed, trust controlled, clean title, no mortgage. Adrian stood in the empty living room holding the keys, looking strangely quiet. It feels different, he said. Because you didn't chase it, I replied. You qualified for it. Vanessa walked through the rooms slowly, not filming. Not posting, just observing. That was new. Miles ran down the hallway laughing. This one's my room. Stability sounds like that, not like celebration, like safety, but alignment is never fully secure. It must be maintained. 3 nights after moving in, Adrian came by alone. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where his suitcases once stood beside mine. Mom, he said quietly, I turned down a partnership today. Why? They wanted quick access to capital once Tier 3 reopens. It felt rushed, I nodded slowly, and I realized I've been chasing status instead of building value. That sentence mattered more than the lottery. I studied him carefully. Growth is uncomfortable, I said. But it's stable. He looked at me differently then, not as financial support, not as obstacle, as structure. Meanwhile, Vanessa began therapy voluntarily. Margaret confirmed attendance through compliance reports. That wasn't required. That was intentional. One afternoon, Vanessa stopped by unexpectedly. She wasn't dressed for content. No makeup, no performance. I built my worth on being admired, she said quietly. Living under your roof made me feel dependent. I reacted to that instead of addressing it. I didn't rush to reassure her. Accountability must stand on its own. And now, I asked, now I'm trying to build something real, not just visible. That's the first time she didn't say wealth. She said real. That distinction matters. Months passed. Behavioral consistency review continued. No external leverage attempts. No public exaggerations. No pressure tactics. Tier 3 remains restricted but pending reassessment. Thomas Green's office has closed the claim file completely. Margaret maintains quarterly oversight. Structure remains intact. One evening, Miles sat beside me on the porch. Grandma, yes. Are we safe now? I smiled gently. Safety isn't a moment, sweetheart, it's a habit. He nodded like he understood more than most adults do, and that's when I realized something important. The real transformation wasn't about money distribution. It was about identity recalibration. Adrian is learning to lead without optics. Vanessa is learning to build without spectacle. Miles is learning that stability isn't loud. And I am learning that protection doesn't mean isolation. It means boundary, but the final review still approaches. In 30 days, Margaret will determine whether Tier 3 discretionary access resumes fully or remains permanently structured. And that decision will depend not on words spoken in review meetings, but on behavior maintained when no one is watching. And that kind of consistency, it reveals everything. The final review took place exactly 6 months after the wire transfer cleared. Not because Margaret Ellis enjoys ceremony, but because time exposes what pressure cannot. We met again at my dining table. Same chairs. Same light through the windows. But the energy was different. 6 months ago, the room felt defensive. Now it felt measured. Margaret arrived with her leather briefcase and that same unreadable expression. Adrian sat straighter than he used to. Not performative, grounded. Vanessa looked composed but not curated. No camera, no brand posture, just presence. Miles sat quietly at the end of the table with a notebook, pretending to draw but listening as always. Margaret opened her folder. 6-month behavioral consistency review, she began evenly. No external leverage attempts, no unauthorized financial representations. Debt restructuring completed, therapy attendance verified. Joint decision-making documented, no displacement behavior. She closed the file. Tier 3 discretionary distribution may now be conditionally reinstated. Adrian exhaled slowly. Vanessa didn't smile. She just nodded once like someone who understands the weight of what was earned. Margaret looked at me. Dorothy, final authorization rests with you. The room went quiet. I folded my hands. For 10 years, they lived under my roof. For 10 years, I quietly funded stability while absorbing discomfort. Then one ticket shifted the dynamic but not the truth. Before I sign anything, I said calmly, I want to revisit something. Vanessa's eyes flickered. Adrian looked uncertain. The night my suitcases were by the door, I continued, what did that moment represent? Adrian answered first. Fear, he said quietly. Vanessa swallowed. Ego, she added. I nodded. It represented instability. I turned toward Miles. And what did you feel? He looked down at his notebook. Like people could disappear. That sentence still holds weight. I turned back to Margaret. The trust exists to prevent that. Margaret gave a small nod. Understood. I signed the authorization, not because time passed, but because behavior aligned. Tier 3 funds would be released in structured quarterly distributions, monitored, not blind. Freedom with framework. Adrian looked at me carefully. Thank you, Mom. I held his gaze. Don't thank me, maintain it. Vanessa spoke next, her voice steady. I used to think the lottery made us powerful. She paused. It didn't. It exposed us. That was the most honest sentence she's ever spoken in this house. After Margaret left, the four of us remained at the table. No celebration, no champagne, just quiet understanding. Grandma, Miles said suddenly, can I ask something? Always. Why didn't you just tell them right away that the ticket was yours? There it was, the question beneath everything. I smiled softly. Because I needed to see who would ask. Vanessa looked down. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. We didn't, he said. No, I replied. You didn't. Silence. Then Vanessa looked up. When you asked, did you check the name on the ticket? I hadn't. I nodded. That's the lesson. Wealth creates noise, but integrity requires attention. The name was always there. Mine, Dorothy Elaine Sinclair, signed clearly, legally binding. But more than that, it represented authorship, ownership, accountability. I stood and walked to the study. On the wall, framed beside the original ticket, is a small plaque Margaret had made months ago. It reads, structures protect what emotions threaten. I ran my fingers lightly over the glass. $50 million did not change my life the way people assume. It didn't create strength, it revealed it. It didn't create fracture, it exposed it. It didn't make me powerful, it made me visible. And visibility is dangerous when you're unprepared. That's why structure matters. Weeks later, life settled into something steady. Adrian's sales performance improved not because of capital access, but because his confidence no longer depended on perceived status. Vanessa shifted her content entirely. She now speaks openly about financial literacy, transparency, and the illusion of curated wealth. She lost followers at first, then she gained new ones, people drawn to honesty instead of spectacle. Miles thrives. His education trust continues to grow quietly. He rides his bike in the neighborhood without fear of disappearing stability. As for me, I remain in this house I built and own outright. The trust remains active. Oversight continues. Not because I expect collapse, but because sustainability requires maintenance. One evening, Vanessa joined me on the porch. I resented living under someone else's roof, she said softly. Now I realize I was living under protection. I looked at her carefully. Protection doesn't shrink you, I said. It stabilizes you. She nodded, no defensiveness, just understanding. The lottery commissioner closed our file months ago. Thomas Green sent a final confirmation letter noting full compliance and clean disbursement. Margaret Ellis still reviews quarterly reports, but the tone has shifted from defensive to collaborative. And sometimes, late at night, I think back to that moment in the kitchen. The suitcases, the words, "we're fine now." In my response, I didn't argue, I didn't scream, I didn't defend myself emotionally. I just asked one simple question. Did you check the name on the ticket? Because in life, far beyond lottery wins, people often celebrate outcomes without verifying ownership. They assume entitlement. They overlook authorship. They chase visibility, but stability belongs to the one who signs carefully, the one who plans quietly, the one who builds structure before applause arrives. My name was on that ticket, but more importantly, my discipline was behind it. And that's the real inheritance. Not money, not houses, not distributions, discipline, boundaries, structure, integrity. That is what protects families, that is what prevents disappearance. And that is what my grandson will remember long after the numbers fade. The ticket is framed now, not as a trophy, as a reminder that quiet women who build carefully should never underestimate the power of a signature. And if life ever places your suitcases by the door before verifying your value, don't argue. Don't panic, just smile, and ask the question that changes everything.